Conservative Party of Canada and the leader of the Conservative Party.
I said it like 5 times yesterday, and I'll say it again today. This week is going to be messy. It's going to be spicy, and well, there's going to be a lot that goes down, and it's going to be very fascinating to watch it all from afar. First being which, well, we talked about it yesterday. Poilievre and the Conservatives lifted some of the words from the MOU and put it into a motion for the Liberals to vote on in terms of this pipeline. Really trying to put them in a corner, being like, all right, what is it going to be, folks? What's it going to be? And guess what? Well, Liberals voted against it, so we'll be talking about that, as well as other things that are happening around Bill C-15 and how the Liberals are getting really, really agitated that their subsection got called out for wanting to give exceptions to their favorite individuals and businesses, and that getting called out. And they're like, there's nothing happening here. How dare you call us out? Oh, it's been wild, and we're going to be getting into all of it. Welcome to the Elevate Podcast. I'm your host, Josh. If you get any value from today's episode, take the time to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us grow. It helps us get to new audiences. And it helps people see there is something different than what the mainstream media has to offer. And now let's get our first story, shall we? The vote happens tonight on the opposition motion about this pipeline. However, the Liberals already announced late last night that they are planning to vote against it. It says here, Carney government to vote against the Conservative motion on pipeline support. Surprise, surprise. The Liberal government will vote against a Conservative motion on Tuesday that calls for the federal government to support a bitumen pipeline, a senior government source tells CTV News. The opposition motion, which is non-binding, explicitly calls for the support of one or more pipelines enabling the export of at least 1 million barrels a day of low-emission Alberta bitumen from a strategic deep-water port on the BC coast to Asia markets, and for the adjustment to the Oil Tanker Moratorium Act while respecting the duty to consult Indigenous peoples. The wording of the motion is similar to the Memorandum of Understanding that was signed last month between the federal government and Alberta, which outlined the conditions that need to be met for a new oil pipeline to the Pacific to proceed, but does not include measures Alberta has agreed upon. According to the source, the motion ignores critical elements of the MOU, such as industrial carbon pricing, co-ownership opportunities for Indigenous people, and engagement with British Columbia. As a result, the federal government will vote against it. By refusing to support all elements of this MOU, Conservatives are demonstrating their intent to divide Canadians and inability to get things built, the source said, while emphasizing the current trade war with the U.S. And this was kind of the chicken game that was being played. And this was always a risk, and we thought this would be essentially what was going to end up happening, was the Conservatives didn't necessarily quote exactly word for word what was in the MOU. They did. They used the exact words in it. However, there's pieces of it that they excluded because, well, that would be against what the Conservatives agree with, right? So when you're putting an opposition motion forward and you're against the industrial carbon tax, you're against all the carbon capture technology, when you're against those things, you can't necessarily put that into your opposition motion, because if you say, yeah, we're in support of this, well, now the Liberals have a way to come back at you. So it was one of those situations where it was, yeah, they were putting Liberals in a no-win situation. However, the Liberals did what they just did here. Is now we're going to be voting against it because you don't have any of the carbon capture terminology put in there. You have nothing with the industrial carbon price included. So yeah, we actually vote against the premise of this bill because not everything's included that we agreed to. And that is where things now get interesting. As I said last night, I posted about it. Let the politicking begin. Who's going to win this narrative war? Because now that's the headline, right? That's the headline. People who headline read, that's going to get them caught. Carney government to vote against Conservative motion on pipeline support. People are going to read that and be like, whoa, 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 whoa. And they might get a paragraph in and they're going to be like, whoa, I don't know how I feel about this, guys. I don't know how. We know how Liberals completely and utterly thrive on the fact that people are low information voters, are only kind of catching headlines, only catching little drops here and there. So when they see headlines like this, they're going to be like, whoa, I thought I was on board with the MOU. I thought that was a good thing. Why are you voting against it? What's happening? And so that's the next piece that Conservatives and Liberals are going to be jockeying over, is who's going to win the narrative war on the panel shows? Who's going to win the narrative war on the news shows? Well, we know that trends towards the Liberals, so you'll hear the likes of David Cochrane trying to, hold the water for the party yet again. But we'll see what ends up happening there. But that is essentially what has taken place is, well, Conservatives couldn't necessarily put the carbon pricing in there. They couldn't necessarily put the carbon capture stuff in there because then they actually have to vote on it themselves as well. So Liberals said, no, we're voting against it. So that's where it's going to come down to, is who's going to win the narrative on this one. Because at the end of the day, Liberals are arguing that this was just a way to divide Canadians, as we see on this article. They're not taking it seriously. They're just trying to divide Canadians. And I'll be honest with you, they're not trying to divide Canadians. They're trying to divide you. They're trying to divide the Liberal Party because, well, this story broke yesterday that the anti-hate bill stalled after Fraser's office brokered a deal without the PMO approval. Sources say, welcome to CBC, baby. The future of the federal government's anti-hate bill C9 is unclear after Justice Minister Sean Fraser's office brokered a deal with the Bloc Québécois without getting it approved by the Prime Minister's office, sources tell CBC News. Bill C9 proposes new criminal code offenses, including one that would make it a crime to intentionally promote hatred against identifiable groups in public using certain hate or terrorism-related symbols. It would also make hate-motivated crimes a specific offense and crack down on willfully intimidating and obstructing people outside places of worship. But in a minority parliament, the Liberals need support to pass the bill. It is set to go through a clause-by-clause study in the Justice Committee composed of Liberals, Conservatives, and Bloc Québécois MPs today. 8 hours slated for that today. So we'll see how that all goes. But this is the divide that's happening in the party right now. Sean Fraser's used to working on his own, doing whatever he wants because Trudeau didn't really have any oversight over him. And so now he says, okay, well, I just need to get this bill done and to get through. We need to make sure we can control what people are thinking and feeling, make sure we can make whatever they think and believe criminal. And we're going to disguise it as a hate bill, disguise as, well, we're trying to crack down on people who are being hateful. And it's like, no. You're trying to crack down on people that you hate. That's what this bill is really disguised as. So, Sean Fraser's trying to get this in, make it happen. I'll make a deal with whoever I need. I'll make a deal with the devil if I have to. Let's just get this bill over the line. And then sources break that, oh no, I didn't talk to the boss. Didn't pass it through the boss. And now this fire has been ongoing. And Jasmine said it great on her show yesterday, where this is a significant issue because this bill hinges and talks about very critical aspects of our freedom of expression here in this country. It's going after our freedom of religion in this country. It's infringing on those aspects that are so critical to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And you're just trying to blitz it through and not talk to your boss about it. And now it blew up in your face. And do you know why it blew up in the face? Well, let's talk about it. It's because conservatives made such a huge stink about it. That's why. It's because the likes of Andrew Lawton filibustering for 2 hours make sure this doesn't get passed in committee. You have the likes of Jamil Javani getting up in the House of Commons, calling the Liberals cultural imperialists for espousing and impressing their beliefs and worldviews on worship centers in this country. It's these things that caught the ire. Then obviously all the messaging that fell behind of this bill trying to limit your freedom of religion in this country. That's what allowed this to blow up in the face. On top of shows like this and others who are talking about it, you talking about it, you sharing it. That's what made this blow up in their face. And now more fractures are happening within that party because, again, as I said, they're not built on anything genuine. This party isn't built on anything real. It's all built on people trying to keep their jobs. And they'll say whatever they have to make that happen. And so much pressure was put on Sean Fraser and the Liberal Party to deal with the ongoing issues with terrorist acts in this country that they tried to just whisk through this bill, claiming that's going to solve the issue when it really doesn't. They just need to implement the laws that are already in the books, i.e., not allowing criminals to hide behind our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. That would be one. That would be helpful. Instead, it brought in more laws to be more controlling and limit more people, claiming it's solving the issue. And boom, blew up right in their face because they're so arrogant to think that that was going to work. So as I said, stories like these, it's more to expose the fracture within the party, that the fact there's so many liberals who are saying, I didn't want this pipeline. I didn't want it. And yes, so that's why, as I said, it puts the Conservatives in a tough spot, because if they did put word for word, these are the things of the MOU, we support it. So now you're putting yourself on record saying you support carbon capture technology, you support the industrial carbon pricing, but it would have put the Liberals in a very tough spot because, well, that whole party does not agree with this MOU as it currently stands. So where it leaves us is a narrative war, and we'll see who ends up winning it. Because speaking of bills that Liberals are trying to ram through, we talked about it yesterday, Bill C-15, budget amendment bill, essentially, just trying to make sure they get this budget passed fully. And page 335, actually, we discovered there was a subsection in there that says, no, actually, we're going to allow our ministers to be able to give exceptions to businesses to circumvent acts of parliament. That's what we're going to do. And Conservative, the Star called it out, the Bloc called it out, and the Conservatives are now calling out, being like, whoa. Yeah, what is this? Why are you just allowing businesses to just kind of circumvent our rules in this country and how we operate? What's up with this? Why did you just try to sneak that in? And the Liberals really didn't like that. And it was called out in debate in the House of Commons. And man, the Liberal MP, Kevin Lamoureux, really didn't like it and made it about everything else other than what was being addressed in this. It was fascinating.
And skyrocketing bills.
I found it very distasteful. In fact, quite frankly, when I listened to what the member said, he wants to feed into some sort of anger and generate anger. There is no corruption. There's a lot of transparency. There's a whole lot of accountability. Maybe the Conservative Party needs to look in the mirror, quite frankly. Because if they really and truly believed half of what they said, this bill would have passed to a committee stage where it could have been broken down, where you would have numerous standing committees dealing with it. There's nothing that's being hidden here other than a Conservative agenda, which is purely self-interested, where they have character assassination and make allegations that they cannot support. Madam Speaker, it's disgusting, and members should be ashamed of themselves.
Well, member for Grant.
Lamoureux was not too happy because their BS is constantly being called out and it's being suffocated. We knew this party was done last election. They were done. They found new life because they just replaced the leader. However, it's still the same party. I don't care what anyone else says. It's still the same party. And they're reeling as bad as they were when the last parliament ended. Except for, again, they were only given just a little bit of new life because they were able to replace the leader and have a new face, but they're still doing all the same crap, actually even worse. Now they're ramping it up. And so when you know you're doing the wrong thing, when you know it's a tough sell with the Canadian people, it's a tough sell in Parliament, well, when you can't make the proper argument anymore and your argument does not stand up anymore, well, what happens? You result to this. You get angry, you bluster, you get frustrated, and then you just blame it on the opposition for simply bringing it up, saying, could you explain this? Oh, you can't. So you're saying there's a potential that Carney's suite of companies are going to benefit from this type of subsection inside this bill. That Carney can just, yeah, you don't have to worry about acts of parliament. We're just going to push you right through, and I'll dictate who gets what contracts, and I'm going to get rich, baby. We saw it as well, where it is now clear that to Parliament that Carney directly benefits when Brookfield does well. Now they're bringing motions together to get Carney to sell all of his Brookfield stock. It's becoming very clear because we know what will happen. If they are able to make that happen and try to catch all the other remnants of what he's doing in terms of how he's going to benefit from in his private investments by the decisions he makes in policy, I would say Mark Carney's going to disappear from politics fairly quickly. If that succeeds, if they're able to make that happen, he will be gone because we really do know the only reason he's here, and that's to benefit himself. And knowing that he can have direct say on what policy gets pushed so that he can direct it to the suite of companies that will benefit his investment portfolio. But Lamoureux was, well, on a tear this week because on the same notion, he's upset that Conservatives are obstructing Bill C-15, essentially trying to get this budget through. He again claims that Conservatives just hate Canada. They hate everything that's in this budget that's going to help Canadians. And it's like, no. We just hate your excessive spending on it, your lack of care, your lack of focus of what's actually going to move the needle for Canadians. And we're also mad about the subsection you threw in there to make sure that certain businesses are exempt from acts of parliament. That's all we're mad about. But of course, as I said, when your argument cannot stand on its own legs any longer, where do you go to? Frustration, anger, and pointing at the other side for simply pointing it out. Watch this.
The Conservative Party of Canada, in particular the leader of the Conservative Party, just doesn't get it.
Nope.
It's
Doesn't
about
get it.
building Canada strong, Mr. Speaker. The budget is there, the support is there for Canadians. And while every Liberal member of Parliament and the Prime Minister is focused on building Canada strong, we get the Conservative Party solely focused on the party's best interest. It's time that they put Canadians' interests first, Mr. Speaker, and that means allowing legislation to pass.
That's right.
Bail reform legislation.
That's right.
Budget legislation.
That's right.
There's only one thing standing in the way of its passage. It's the Conservative Party of Canada and the leader of the Conservative Party. Get off their back ends and get to work.
Oh, that's always good. Get off your back ends and get to work. Coming from the party who said we were in the crisis of our lifetimes and then went on a 2-month break. Yeah, that's who I want to hear that from. Of course. But this is where I'm saying, this is where it's going. This week is going to be very wild because we're about to go on this long Christmas break. And everything's coming to a head this week. Bill C9, conservatives are trying to stall Bill C9 as much as long as possible so we can just get into the Christmas break and not have to worry about it. And right now, Bill C9's at a political stalemate. It's not going anywhere at the moment because of all the internal issues that happen within the Liberal Party around the issue. As I said, it's all coming out, and it just is going to require time and a little bit of pressure. They're already breaking and tearing at the seams over this. Look at them. It's fascinating. Because remember, he said it here. This budget's here to help Canadians. Well, Canadians don't feel that way, we learned.
It shows Canadians don't see how it will help them financially. CTV's Jeremy Chiron explains.
It's a book filled with big promises, but Federal Budget 2025 doesn't do enough to help Canadians with their finances, according to a new survey.
The budget has a long-term vision for jobs. Maybe it's put a spotlight on the fact that good economic policy might not make for good politics.
A new Nanos survey conducted for CTV News shows less than 1 in 5 Canadians think the government's fiscal plan will help them financially. In fact, just over 1 in 3 believe the budget will in some way worsen their personal finances.
That's not a very great number for a government that is looking to build confidence in Canadians who are struggling to pay for the bills.
Well, maybe they can just do this. Maybe the Liberals can just tell Canadians, buy Brookfield stock and you'll be rich. And then we'll just let them do everything they want, right? That's what they can do. But the fact that the Canadians, I'm like, I don't see how this budget's going to help me. 1 in 5 Canadians feel like this is going to help them, whereas the majority actually feel like this is going to make them worse off. Yeah, but Lamoureux would like you to think differently, right? These Liberals, man, they love to gaslight. Anyways, I'll see you this afternoon. Have yourselves a good one. I'm out.